Hey everybody, how's it going? So today we've got something really cool, an ultra cheap bass guitar that had 15-year-old strings on it. Now, I've seen a lot of situations where a bass player comes into the studio and hasn't put new strings on, but I don't ever think I've seen them this old before. But I know a lot of you guys out there are struggling with exactly the same thing, a bass player who's too cheap to restring his bass. I know we should all just be thankful that he graced us with his presence at band practice, and asking for new strings is pretty much sacrilege. So the bass guitar we have here is called a Crestwood. I have no idea, I've never heard of it before, but it's definitely a carbon copy of the Fender Precision bass, and there's a good chance your bass player has one of these too. My friend Brandon, who you've seen on the show numerous times before, had this kicking around. I think it was purchased as for a school project many years ago and has served basically as a sketch pad for the last decade and a half. It has never been in the studio, it's just been there to help write songs. And it still had the original strings on it. I thought this would be a great example for a before and after shootout. Old, really dead strings on a crappy bass versus new ones. Because most of you guys playing in bands these days have exactly this kind of setup. Old, dead strings on the cheapest bass the bass player could find. I also cleaned up the bass, adjusted the truss bod, and it vastly improved the playability of the instrument for the after clips. I've got to thank the people over at Gobi Labs for sending me these, their guitar polisher and their fretboard conditioner. They worked absolute miracles on this thing. So let's get right to it. Here's a clip of the Crestwood old strings versus new. We're going to check out the direct signal as well as the sound of my bass through a typical recording setup, a bass Sans amp running into an Empirical Labs distressor. Now, just to make this really typical, Brandon is a guitar player, not a bass player. So we're not going to get the greatest bass technique. You know, pretty much the same situation as the guy playing bass in your band. Except Brandon is actually a good guitar player, not a failed one. So as you can hear, there is a massive difference. I'll be very clear here. I'm looking for what works in a metal mix. You might be able to get away with old strings possibly in a jazz situation, but the old strings are so dead, it really sounds like they've lost sustain. It's almost like there's a very short attack and then it just kind of drops off. The newer strings, while brighter, have a much more consistent level and punch. The old strings just kind of sound weak, and no amount of EQ is ever gonna fix that. So let's see how it works in a full mix. Okay, there's a much more subtle difference, but then again with the old string, there's just no top end definition at all. And it really gets lost in the mix. Once again, EQ will not save you because you just can't turn up what isn't there. I'm gonna do a follow-up video to this where we take the old strings and boil them to see if there's any improvement in the tone. Watch for that. Meanwhile, I gotta say, with the new strings and a truss rod adjustment, the bass is actually pretty cool. The action has been vastly improved, and thanks to the cleanup, I feel like I don't need a tetanus shot after playing. This bass has gone from complete piece of crap to, well, halfway decent. But if you're one of those guys who insists on saying, I like the sound of the old strings better than the new ones, then you are exactly what's wrong with music these days.